Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be talking about some potential 2024 NFL draft trades that could take place in the first round. So we've got 8 here. We've got 4 trade downs. We've got 4 trade ups. We're going to talk about players they could look to acquire, why that pick can make sense for those players, what could the compensation look like ultimately. So there's going to be a wide range of picks. It could go as late as one of the last picks in the first round. It could go as early as having a shot at maybe one of the best players that isn't a quarterback. So we're going to talk about a lot of different possibilities and what that could really look like for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and maybe a little bit about how likely is this actually to happen. So let's go ahead. Let's jump in with our first one. We're going to go from our latest trades as far as how far back you move, all the way up to the earliest that they can make. The first one I've got is with the Arizona Cardinals at pick number 27. And I'll just be honest, guys, probably not going to talk about pick 4 here because I think Arizona's set at pick 4. I think what they want is an insane asking price of 3 first-rounders for that pick. And at the end of the day, they're not going to get that unless it's for a quarterback. It's the only way, and I just don't think that's realistic. I think a team would rather trade with the Chargers and go get their quarterback there while giving up maybe 2 firsts and something else. So, talking about this trade, though, because this is the subject at hand, I think it's possible Jacksonville could consider a really big trade back if they've got a lot of players that they like on the board. So our first idea here is talking about potentially moving back from 17 all the way to 27. And so this is a lot of spots, and because it's a lot of spots, I think you could get 2 very valuable picks out of it. Pick number 66 would be one of the first picks of the 3rd round. You could get a very good player there. You could get a 2nd round prospect easily. You could get an early 2nd round prospect even. Just the way the board falls, I think that's very possible. And then at 104, this would be the 4th pick of day 3 of the NFL draft. So if you want a top player that maybe fell, that puts you in really good position to maybe where you can move up from 104 to 101 and then throw in a pick swap of some sort or 236, something later, and make your move like that. So some players they might consider moving back for at this point. If they're moving back to 27, I think probably one of the best players that you could possibly get at that point would be Kool-Aid McKinstry. I don't know if the Jaguars would be able to land him at 27, but I do think you could consider making this kind of trade, watching the board if you have a lot of prospects you like, and once you get down to a couple, if you're not keen on any certain one, wait until the latest you have to move up, and then go get one of your guys. If you've got a ton of grades on players that are identical, and all those guys are there, that's a logical way of going about it, as long as you're not in love with someone way more than everyone else. So you could be looking at Kool-Aid McKinstry. One crazy one that could take place potentially, one guy who could drop, could be Johnny Newton. You could end up seeing him move back around 27. I think I'd want to probably stay put and pick him personally, but I think he could also fall and be available around that range. You could be talking about Graham Barton in addition. I think he'd be another player that would make a ton of sense. He's a versatile offensive lineman. You can play him wherever you want. That first year, he could be your guy that takes over when there's injuries, and then you could try to settle him down maybe at right guard for the future. You could also even just bring him in and say, hey, you're going to play tackle and trade Cam. Like, you have options with Graham Barton. You could also look at one of the wide receivers. I think this would be a really nice spot to get Adonai Mitchell if he does fall down the board. I do believe he could end up going before pick 27, though. I think he could go even much earlier. So you could have one of the wide receivers available here and get your guy. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when we're talking about moving back to pick number 27, if that's a possibility, you want to have a lot of prospects who are ranked very similar on your board and want to try to get more picks out of this and just land one of those prospects later. I think that's the reality of moving back this far. Because otherwise, I just don't think this is a logical trade. Because if you got a guy you like, and you've only got maybe one other person you consider there at 17, you're probably not moving back this far, because then say that one of those guys goes off the board immediately, you're trying to move back up, or you're sitting there, concerned about whether this guy falls, and you're having to move up nearly that whole distance again, and there might be a premium on that. So it could just end up not being worth it at all to move back that far. But I think that's the scenario where you consider moving back to 27 and making another pick there. Funny enough, that would be, I believe, the third year in a row that the Jaguars have selected at 27th overall in the first round. 2022, it was Devin Lloyd in a trade up from 33. 2023, it was a trade down from 24 to 25 and 25 to 27 to get Anton Harrison. So would be kind of funny if they picked where the Cardinals were right now and made a third in a row at that pick. Now our second team to talk about is the Green Bay Packers. This could be a sneaky candidate to move up and get one of the top cornerbacks in the class. They could use an addition there. They could be looking at a player such as Terrion Arnold. They could also be fans of Kool-Aid McKinstry and want to make sure they get him. They could feel like maybe some of those teams after Jacksonville's pick, while they're probably not taking cornerback, they might not be willing to do business. Because I do think that for Cincinnati, for the Rams, for the Steelers, there's going to be very good prospects available that fit their needs. Most of the time when I'm looking through the first round, those are not picks I'm considering moving back from all that often. So I could see Green Bay being interested in moving up. If you're moving with Green Bay, I think you're probably trying to get that second rounder away from them. I think if they send that and it's just that for 17 along with 25, that's probably a bit too rich for them to have to give that all up. You probably got to flip something back. So this would be a logical outcome where Green Bay keeps the same amount of picks, but they heavily downgrade that second round selection they have to one in the fifth round. So I could definitely see that as a possibility for Jacksonville for a trade. And we're talking about a lot of the same things here. You're looking to draft a prospect that has a lot of people with identical grades. They're still available on the board, and you're not sold on above everyone else. It's the same exact thing where we're talking about having all these guys available. You don't know who to pick, and you're wanting to move back, get more picks, and then just take whoever's left. So it's the same conversation. I think, let's see, probably not going to have any prospects get knocked off that list from what we talked about with Arizona, because I think with Tampa Bay at 26, you're probably talking about an edge rusher. You could possibly have them take McKinstry. So this could be a more likely pick if you want McKinstry. Although, of course, you would have to assume that maybe Terrion Arnold is still left at 17, and the Packers could be moving up for him. But generally, it's a lot of repeating the same things. I'm not going to spend much time on the Packers. What I am going to talk about, though, is a little bit different of an area you could trade with, and that would be at 20 with the Pittsburgh Steelers. This one, you'd move the same picks that you did with the Packers, except instead of getting 58, you're getting 84, and you only move back 3 spots instead of 8. So, in this trade, you would essentially get passed by the Steelers, the Bengals, and the Rams. So, the positions that would probably eliminate, you're probably losing options at tackle, offensive tackle that is, and you're probably losing options at defensive tackle, and I could see potentially the Rams considering an edge rusher. But those teams, I think, would probably stay in place at their picks, other than maybe the ones who pick later. So the Steelers being the first of those conversations, because I think the Bengals could consider offensive tackle or defensive tackle as their top options. And we've heard a lot about the Steelers maybe being the team for Amarius Mims. If they go get Amarius Mims, it's possible they're sitting here, and then at pick number 18, the Bengals snag him. So if they want to make sure they get their guy, and they did this last year for their tackle, moving up 3 spots from 17 to 14, they could make that move, pick up Mims, and then Jacksonville moves back. They get in their third rounder, get in their shot at the board, and they could go get a guy like maybe Devontae Walker at that point, or Jalen McMillan. someone they think could fit into that Z receiver role that they've been scouting, that they've been talking to in pre-draft visits, all the different events going on. This would be a logical trade to get that done. This would also be a great trade to pull off if you're looking to get, say, Kool-Aid McKinstry. Because McKinstry, I don't think he's going in any of those picks, and I don't think a team is moving into one of those selections to take him from you. So if you're looking to get a player like that, I really like this move for the Jaguars. But you're probably losing those options along the trenches. So if those are the players you're looking at, probably doesn't make as much sense. It's a lot more risky for the team. So those are my thoughts on a trade with the Steelers, but ultimately, I think this is one of the better options you have as far as moving back. Now, another one that's sort of interesting, this will be our last trade back opportunity. It's one spot earlier, and that's with the Los Angeles Rams. Instead of giving up 153, you keep that pick, you get 19, which is one selection earlier, but you're going to get 99 instead of 84. It's very similar compensation. But the reason why I think that it could end up being maybe a little more expensive with the Rams is that this could be a trade up for an Aaron Donald replacement. And not that you can replace Aaron Donald, but simply what I'm saying is a player who's going to take a spot on the field, right? And there are two candidates in this draft that could be very good defensive tackles. I don't know if they're gone before Jacksonville picks. We might be sitting there with Johnny Newton and Byron Murphy II just sitting there on the board available for us to select. I think if that's the case, the Bengals would probably go defensive tackle at their pick if we skip on those guys. So the Rams may be in love with one of those players and say, hey, let's make a trade with Jacksonville. Let's give up this pick and let's go get our guy, because this is going to be someone we're going to keep on our team for a long time. We expect to make a big impact. It's worth it for us to make this move. So I could see the Rams getting aggressive at that point, not wanting to have to move up further. You think about some of the teams they would have to trade up with. I don't think it's as realistic before Jacksonville, because you got the Seattle Seahawks, division rival. You got the Indianapolis Colts. They would be moving back behind us. They would probably lose their option of cornerback. And then you're looking at the Saints, who want an offensive tackle, really bad, could take an edge rusher too, but they're probably not moving back from their selection, because if you do, well, you're giving up a lot of options there, because Jacksonville could even consider one. The Seahawks could take an interior guy that maybe played tackle in college that the Saints could see as a tackle. Fuanga would be an example. The Bengals, if I didn't mention them, would be one. So it doesn't make sense for the Saints. The Raiders are probably where they have to move up if they're going to look for a different team. So this makes a lot of sense for the Rams. If they want to secure their guy, if they're worried about Cincinnati, I think they would call Jacksonville. You can get a similar deal done to what you did last year, moving back a couple spots, except you're getting a little earlier of a pick because, well, this is kind of their only option. And at the same time, you're talking about an earlier pick in the first round that they're trading up for. So I really like the idea of that. I think if they stay put at 17 and they're thinking about making their pick or maybe moving back, if you got your eyes on a position that isn't in the trenches, it makes a ton of sense to move back here and try to get some extra picks and get a valuable one in that in the compensatory pick at 99. Now getting to the more fun options. I can't say funner. That's not a word. But the more fun options that we got here, trading up in the draft, I've got 4 different opportunities available. And these are going to involve players. Some of them, that is. Not all of them. But the first one is, and this is with the New Orleans Saints, be moving up to 14. Like I just talked about, the Saints are a team that's going to want to tackle. They're going to need their guy that can start this year, probably in place of Ryan Ramczyk. And then they got Trevor Penning, who has not been that great, but he was drafted by this current staff, and he's going into his 3rd year. So it's possible they still want to start him, and they're kind of in a position where I think they're going to have to. So Jacksonville is in a position where they've got 2 starting tackles. And they've got a swing tackle, and they've got all these picks that they could go get another guy who could be the future swing tackle. Or heck, even at 14, they could end up taking their future tackle if they like someone there. Don't know if they do that with the Saints. I think the Saints would probably prefer Jacksonville wasn't taking a tackle if they want to move back with them. But this could be a solution to their problem. So the idea is if Walker Little right now is probably worth, I'd say, a fifth, somewhere around that range, you're moving 2 fifth-rounders. You're giving them a cheap player to a team that is cash-strapped for quite a while because of their decisions they continue to make every offseason with the salary cap that just hurt them. I don't know why they don't stop, especially when they're not making the playoffs, but that's what the Saints are doing. You flip them a player that's worth a fifth. You flip them another fifth-round pick. They get more shots at the board, and you look at the teams that would pick before them. Obviously, you'd have Jacksonville now. You'd hope that's not a tackle if you're the Saints, but you've got the Colts who are probably going cornerback. They could go wide receiver. And you got the Seahawks who are probably going interior offensive line. So, see, I could see maybe the Saints get one of their guys who still falls to them because they could also consider that Cam Jordan replacement for the long term. So that's why this could make sense for New Orleans. They get their starter at tackle. They move back. They get in their pick. They could still possibly even get their guy. It frees them up to make another selection and not be forced to take a position, especially if that position ends up being weaker than they expect at their selection. So this does make a lot of sense. And I'll say, if it was me in charge, this would be something I'd be considering if I'm Jacksonville, if I want to move up for a tackle. I'd either move up with the Raiders, or I'd flip this pick to New Orleans along with our backup and another late selection. Those would be my thoughts on it if this was the direction I went and I wanted an offensive tackle. Now, the next option, and this could be your move maybe for Quinyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold. Probably more likely Mitchell at this point, though, unless he goes very early to the Falcons, who we'll talk about later in this video. But this is number 12 with the Denver Broncos. I think the Broncos could be a very logical trade down candidate. They're either going to get their quarterback of the future this year, get a guy like Bo Nix. Maybe they even trade up for McCarthy. I don't think that happens, but I think you could see Bo Nix going here. And if they don't get that, maybe they want more picks and they want to get stuff for the future that they can use, or just flip some of these that we're sending them for future selections that they could use to maybe move up, get Shedeur Sanders, get whoever it is, right, that falls to them in the draft or that they like next year. But if they're picking Bo Nix, let's say that's the case, and that's probably realistically what's going to happen for Denver. That's been my thought for a while. We'll, of course, see what happens. Are there teams from 13 to 16 that are considering Bo Nix? The Raiders technically could. I don't think that's what they're really going to do, though. I just have this gut feeling that it's going to be Michael Penix Jr. in the early second round. I think he's going to fall out of the first, unfortunately. But I don't think the Raiders are. The Saints aren't going to do it. The Colts obviously no. And the Seahawks, if they're going to go quarterback, I think it's going to be Penix. But I don't think they do that, pick number 16. So I think the Broncos are safe to move down. They don't have a ton of selections that are valuable over these next couple of years. Add to that pile, you send 96 to move up, you send 114. So Jacksonville doing this could be a move to get Quinyon Mitchell. Could be a move to even get maybe a tackle that you want. Even talking about edge rusher, potentially. Like, these are all things we could talk about. Wide receiver, I'm not sure. I don't think that's necessary at pick 12. I don't think you're getting one of the big three there. So it could be that, or potentially, if Jacksonville wants to get within striking range, you could look at maybe trading with the Giants. So the Giants are picking number 6. And if maybe you move up to 12, you can flip number 6 and number 12, throw in your second, and move up to go get your guy at receiver. That's another outcome I think they should consider. I don't think it'll happen, but just a thought from me. I've talked about the multi-team trades for a while now on Twitter. I've talked about them a little bit on these videos as well, but something I think Jacksonville should consider. And what I go off of as far as the value going from 12 to 6 costing probably 48 is the Lions-Cardinals trade from last year, where you look at essentially the value of what the Cardinals had to give up to move up. It's really close to 48. So I think you could maybe send a little bit more, but this could be your way of getting it cheaper to where the Giants aren't just like, okay, you're going to have to send us your first in the future because you're picking 17th and we got to move back that far. Maybe they don't want to do that. So if you're moving up that far, this could be an option as well if you want to find a team that maybe wants to move back and still get their guy. So the Broncos make a ton of sense for that, and it could just more realistically be to go grab a prospect that's going to go to the Raiders or the Saints. Could even throw out the Colts as well. So I like that idea for Jacksonville. Now getting to our last two here, I've got a couple very big trades to talk about, and these are all going to be into the top 10. Number 8th overall with the Atlanta Falcons. I think this is an option that could be on the table. I think to realistically get it done, if you're bidding with other teams, is probably 17, 48, and 114. A lot of people are talking about how it basically costs a second rounder. If you're bidding against Indy as well, if you're bidding against a team who picks before you, by far, like the Jets, you got to have a lot to offer. You got to be able to convince them. And so I think you probably got to throw in one of those priority, day 3 picks. I don't think you could throw in 96. That might be a bit rich because you're giving up your first 3 picks of the draft. You wouldn't pick again until day 3. That would not be ideal. So I could see moving 17, 48, and 114 to get up to 8. Now, talking about what players you're taking there, I think there's probably only one position I could justify moving up to 8 for Jacksonville, and that's going to be a wide receiver. Realistically, the player we're talking about, if it's going to be wide receiver, is going to end up being Rome Odunze. And why I say that is because I'm looking close at the Titans. And the Titans, they need a slot receiver. They have talked about how they don't believe they have a starter set there yet. They have guys they think could do it, but not someone who's like just clearly the guy. They also said earlier this offseason that when it comes to conversations between do we take a tackle, do we take a wide receiver, that they will go wide receiver if the players are just as good because wide receivers score points. And so whether or not you agree with that, I think what that tells us is that if they have a wide receiver available that they could use that is ranked similarly to the offensive tackle that's available, which would be Joe Alt, I think that's very likely. That's your best case scenario for maybe the Tennessee Titans to pass on getting a Malik Nabers. I think they would take Malik Nabers overall. I do believe that because both players can start. Both players give you a massive upgrade at a position of weakness because I'm calling slot wide receiver a position, not just the entire wide receiver room. They could absolutely use it. They have a very expensive room of wide receivers. They have players who are older. By the time Nabers cost them significantly more, they would not have probably either of those players on their team. Maybe Calvin Ridley gets extended. That's possible, but so far down the road, and he'll be a much older player by then. So does it make sense for the Titans to take Malik Nabers? I think it does. And so that's why I say Rome Odunze when we're talking about pick 8. And that will probably come down to the Giants, because I've heard the Giants prefer Odunze. So maybe the Giants end up moving out of the pick, or they end up surprising everyone, going in their position, or we could even say that maybe J.J. McCarthy is on the board for them. So there's some different ways that maybe Odunze could fall. I'm not convinced right now that he will definitely be available at 8. Kind of changed my mind a bit on that because I used to kind of think the opposite. But we'll have to see what happens for sure. But you're moving up for Rome Odunze if you're moving to pick 8, or you're panicking because somehow Neighbors made it there. But I think this would be a very good trade opportunity for Jacksonville if the opportunity is there, if the player is there. You're getting a bona fide wide receiver 1 who's going to transform your offense. You're only paying your first rounder. You're throwing in your second as well. You're giving up a fourth rounder that is probably going to turn into a backup. We've seen from history it might not even be a player who's on the roster in a couple years. So I'm okay trading those picks. I don't think they have as much value as they would usually have to teams because Jacksonville doesn't use them well. So I'd be fine doing a trade like this. I think it'd be a really good opportunity for them. Now, for our last trade, we're going to talk about a couple spots higher. And this is going to be the trade that I think they would do for Malik Neighbors. You could also say Rome Odunze, but we have heard a few places saying, and these I would call them sources. One was John Shipley. The other was E_Dilla, who's knows a ton going on inside the organization. Now, what we've heard is that Neighbors is higher on their board than what Odunze is. So this would be where you'd move up for Neighbors, realistically. That would be pick number 6 with the Giants. And I think this trade costs a lot more to get done if you're moving from 17. You could also just say, hey, let's just throw them 2025 first, be done with it, and that's all you got to do. That's another way you could get this done. But if you don't want to sacrifice that, which I think it's a lot to sacrifice, even though it could be worth it, you're getting a player that I think justifies it. I think they should instead opt to move more picks, but ones that are not as valuable. I think it should be 2 second rounders. Put one in next year so that it's not all at once. You can still make some quality picks this year. And then throw in 114 as well to sweeten the deal. I think that would probably get it done to move up to 6 and go get your guy. So this could be what we see to get Malik Neighbors. Like I said before, I would not deal with it this way. I won't make one trade. If I'm moving up for Malik Neighbors, I'm getting another team involved. And another idea to throw out there as well, just to give ideas. And I think I mentioned this in a recent video as well. So if I have, you're just going to hear it again and you'll survive. But I think the Jaguars, let's say Odunze and Neighbors are available. You got Joe Alt on the board as well. Say those 3 players are there. I think Jacksonville should move up with the Falcons. And then flip 8 and flip 6. So we do the same deal we just talked about with the Falcons, right? But you flip 8 and 6 with the Giants. You tell them you're taking Neighbors if you move up. And the Giants have the security to know that, for one, they're not taking Odunze at number 6. If Jacksonville moves up, you're getting Neighbors. So Odunze is still on the board for the Giants. And number 7, the Titans said they need a slot. They don't need an outside receiver. They're probably not taking Rome Odunze. They're probably not trading out because Joe Alt is sitting there on the board and he's the perfect fit for them. I don't think they trade out for Joe Alt. I just don't think they pick him over Malik Neighbors. That's the only thing I said. So if you're the Giants, you could be very safe in this trade knowing that, hey, these 2 teams are going to stay put. We pretty much know who they're going to draft. We're still going to get our guy. Heck, it'll be cheaper because it'll be a later pick. And there's just not enough risk to worry about this much. You still get your value. I think if you do that, you're probably talking about maybe the Jaguars flipping pick 96 then. Maybe another pick along with that. But you could end up getting this done to move up to number 6 through 2 teams who all have reasons to trade back, because I think the Falcons would make a ton of sense. I didn't even mention this when I talk about them, but just because they're a team that wants edge rushers or cornerbacks, and those players are still going to be there at number 17, and for all we know, they might have their number 1 guy still there, because there's a lot of discussion about who's the best at those positions. I think Mitchell's probably the only player who solidified himself as the best at his position. But edge rusher, there's 3 guys that you can make an argument for. So I think the Falcons could still get a great pick at 17. They get to move down, and they get an extra 2nd round pick, and then probably a 4th rounder. And then the Giants, they still get their guy, the specific one they want. They get 96, and then maybe something else thrown in to sweeten up the deal. That's a really good deal for both teams. And Jacksonville gets to do it for cheaper as well. They're not giving up 2 seconds and a fourth as well. Now you're giving up a second, a third, and a fourth. So that's the way I would approach it. I don't think they'll get that creative. I don't know if they'll get the deal done either. Because I wonder if they're just going to see if maybe one of them falls to the Falcons and then, you go through Tennessee and it's probably over at that pick. Realistically, if Neighbors is the only one left. So we'll have to see what happens. But these are some of the outcomes I think could be possible. Some of the teams I think would be likely for the Jaguars to deal with, and some of the reasons why they would make sense. There's a lot of different players the Jaguars could target. I think we know the pecking order, at least at the top. I think it's pretty clear wide receiver is the top priority. And if they don't get one, well, good luck guessing where they're going, because I think there's going to be a lot of different options available, and it's going to depend on what their big board looks like. But you can't really see that far past maybe the top 10 prospects, and at that point, who knows what they do. But yeah, hope that gives you guys a good idea of maybe some of the costs to move around in this draft, some of the different things they could do, what to look for on draft day, and my ideas right now on where the receivers could end up going. But I appreciate you joining this video, being a part of the channel. Please let me know your thoughts, maybe some trades you would do. Do you think the cost is more or less? I know there's a lot of arguments and discussion about what it actually costs. Some people saying it's like astronomically high because, well, it's such a good draft class, or some people saying, well, it doesn't really cost that much. So give me your thoughts. I thought these were pretty close, but that's all I've got for you guys today. So have a great rest of your day. Enjoy your weekend. And finally, go Jags.